The night Caius Holt, Duke of Merrick, announced his engagement to Lady Cecilia Prynne, the champagne flowed until midnight. He left before the last glass was raised. The garden was dark, cold. October had settled into the stone of Merrick Hall the way it always did, quietly and without asking permission. He heard her before he saw her, a sound so small it was almost nothing. The kind a person makes when they have spent years learning not to make any sound at all, and something slips through anyway. He knew the voice. Verity. She stood near the garden wall, back to the house, shoulders perfectly still, the way shoulders go still when a person is holding themselves together with everything they have left. Caius stopped walking. He stood in the dark and did not move. Before we start Chapter 1, I just want to say that it is a pleasure to share this beautiful story with you. Chapter 1. The Wait of 3 Years. The first thing Verity Marin learned about Merrick Hall was that it did not welcome people. It tolerated them. The ceilings were too high, the corridors too long, and the stone walls held the cold the way old houses hold old grief, completely and without apology. She arrived on a January morning 3 years ago, with one bag, one letter of recommendation folded 4 times in her coat pocket, and the particular kind of composure that comes not from confidence, but from having no alternative. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hale, opened the door before Verity could knock. "You're the new one," she said, not unkindly, simply as a fact. "Verity Marin." She offered her hand. Mrs. Hale looked at it, then at her. "He'll see you in the study. Don't touch anything on the desk." Verity did not ask who he was. She already knew. Everyone in 3 counties knew the name Caius Holt, Duke of Merrick, the man who buried his wife 4 months prior and was not seen in society since. The man whose estate ran like a clock that forgot why it was keeping time. She followed Mrs. Hale through 2 corridors and a gallery that smelled of old paper and cold stone, and tried not to look too long at the portrait on the east wall. A woman with dark eyes and a mouth curved in private amusement, as if she alone understood the joke the rest of the world was missing. She did not ask who it was. Some things announced themselves without help. The study was warmer than the rest of the house. A fire burned low in the grate, and the smell of leather and candle wax settled over everything like a second skin. Caius Holt stood at the window with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him, looking out at a garden that January stripped entirely bare. He did not turn when she entered. She stood, waited, kept her hands still at her sides. 30 seconds passed, perhaps 40. Then, "You managed 3 properties before this one." "2, she said. "The third was a single household, smaller than this wing." He turned then, and Verity understood immediately why society found him difficult, not because he was cruel, but because he looked at people the way he looked at her now, as if he calculated exactly how much of his attention they deserved and already arrived at a number. "The letter says 3. The letter is generous. Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement. Something adjacent to it quickly contained. "Can you manage a house this size?" "I can manage this house," she said. "I don't make general claims." The silence that followed lasted long enough that she wondered if she miscalculated. Then he looked back at the window. "Monday," he said. She started on Tuesday. He never mentioned it. 3 years was long enough to learn a house the way you learn a language, not by studying it, but by living inside it until it stopped feeling foreign. Verity learned Merrick Hall room by room, season by season. She learned that the East Corridor developed a draft in February that no amount of weather stripping would fix, and that the solution was a specific arrangement of the hall rugs that Mrs. Hale discovered by accident 12 years prior and never wrote down. She learned that the silver in the dining room tarnished faster near the windows, that the 3rd step on the back staircase creaked only under a specific weight distribution, and that the garden door needed to be lifted slightly on its hinges before the latch would catch. She learned the staff, their rhythms, their loyalties, their particular brands of stubbornness. Thomas the groundskeeper, who refused to plant anything he did not grow himself from seed. Agnes the parlour maid, who was extraordinarily efficient and extraordinarily opinionated, and somehow never understood that those 2 things were in tension. And Mrs. Hale, who was at Merrick Hall for 30 years and treated every new development with the same expression, a slight narrowing of the eyes that meant she withheld judgment until further evidence arrived, And she learned Caius Holt, not all at once, not by design. The way you learn anyone you spend enough time near, in fragments, in the gaps between what they say and what they do, in the small consistencies that reveal more than any conversation. He rose at 6, was in the study by past, took his coffee without sugar, and left half of it cold on the desk by 9, which drove Mrs. Hale to a quiet fury she expressed by setting the cup closer and closer to the edge each morning, waiting for the day it fell. It never fell, he always moved it, without looking up from whatever he read. He walked the grounds every evening before dinner, rain or frost, with the focused indifference of a man fulfilling a contract with himself. He did not carry an umbrella. Verity quietly ensured one was always left near the garden door, precisely where he would not have to look for it. He used it twice in 3 years and both times left it outside. She stopped replacing it after the second time. He read more than any man she ever encountered, not for show, not for society, but with the particular absorption of someone for whom books were not entertainment, but oxygen. The library at Merrick Hall was already substantial when she arrived. It grew quietly over the years in ways that suggested ongoing conversation with booksellers in London and possibly Edinburgh, and once, based on the packaging, somewhere in France. She noticed things. She noticed everything. It was her job to notice. That was what she told herself. The first winter she found the maps. An entire shelf in the back of the library, atlases, geographical charts, hand-drawn coastal maps that predated anything in print. She pulled one out carefully, spread it on the table in the small room off the kitchen that served as her office, and sat with her cold tea and traced the outline of a coast she would never see. She told herself she would return it in the morning. She returned it 3 days later and took another. It became a habit she never examined too closely. Late nights, when the house went quiet and her ledgers were balanced and there was nothing left that required her attention, she took a map from the library and sat with it and went somewhere else for an hour without moving from her chair. She did not know that Caius noticed the maps out of place. She did not know that 3 weeks after she started borrowing them, a package arrived from London containing 4 new atlases, regions she had not yet reached on the shelf. He shelved them himself, said nothing to anyone. It was the kind of thing that would have undone her entirely. So perhaps it was better that she didn't know. The feelings arrived the way the draft arrived in the East Corridor, gradually, then completely, with no clear point of origin. She could not name the moment. There was no moment. There was only the accumulation of 3 years of proximity, of learning someone so thoroughly that the space between knowledge and something else became impossible to locate. She was careful. She was always careful. But careful has limits, and hers were tested in ways she catalogued privately and with great discipline. The afternoon he came in from the grounds in November and stood by the study fire to warm his hands, and said without turning, "You moved the Hargreaves account to a separate ledger." Not a question, not a complaint, just an acknowledgement that he noticed. "It was cleaner," she said. "It is," he said. And that was all. But she stood in the corridor afterward for a moment longer than she should have. The morning she arrived early to open the study window, her quiet habit, his unspoken preference, and found him already there, already at his desk, and he looked up when she came in, and there was a half-second pause before he looked back down that she spent an unreasonable amount of time not thinking about. The evening he returned from a difficult meeting in the village and said nothing at dinner, and she said nothing either, but ensured that the fire in the study burned higher than usual and that the good brandy sat on the desk and not in the cabinet. The next morning he looked at the desk for a moment before sitting down, with an expression she could not fully read. She left signs the way you leave candles in windows, not expecting anyone to come, but unable to stop lighting them. He never came. Or if he did, he stood outside the light and she never knew. The announcement came on a Thursday in October. Verity was in the linen room on the 2nd floor doing the quarterly inventory with Agnes when she heard the carriage. She did not go to the window. She noted the sound, filed it, and continued counting. An hour later, Mrs. Hale appeared in the doorway with an expression that completed its evidence gathering and arrived at a verdict. "His Grace has an announcement at dinner," she said. "The household is to be present in the hall at 7. Verity wrote the last number in the ledger column, closed it. "I'll make sure everyone is informed," she said. Mrs. Hale lingered a moment longer than necessary, then left. At 7 o'clock, Verity stood with the senior staff at the back of the entrance hall, her hands folded in front of her expression arranged with the precision of someone who practiced arranging it for years. Kaya stood at the base of the stairs, dressed for dinner. The dark coat, the particular straightness of posture that society required of him, and that he wore the way other men wore ill-fitting boots, correctly and with great patience. He spoke for perhaps 90 seconds, the engagement to Lady Cecilia Prine, the marriage in the spring, the household to begin preparations accordingly, applause from the staff. The appropriate words exchanged with the appropriate expressions. Verity's hands remained folded. She was aware distantly of Mrs. Hale glancing at her. She was aware more immediately of her own fingers. Still, composed, doing exactly what they were supposed to do. Only Agnes, standing beside her, might have noticed the precise moment when Verity's thumbnail pressed into her own palm and stayed there. Agnes said nothing. She was a good woman that way. At 9:30, when the household dispersed and the hall went quiet, Verity took her coat from the hook near the kitchen door. The garden was cold. October settled into the stones of Merrick Hall, and the night air carried the particular clarity that comes just before the first frost. Everything sharper, everything closer, everything too much. She walked to the far end of the garden, past the elm, past the iron bench no one ever used, to the low wall where the grounds gave way to the fields beyond. She stood there and allowed herself, for the first time in 3 years, to feel the full weight of something she never once named aloud. She did not make much sound. She learned over a long time not to. But some things slip through anyway. She did not hear the garden door open behind her. She did not hear the footsteps stop. She did not know that 20 feet away in the dark, Caius Holt stood completely still. She did not know that he understood, in the space of one small unguarded sound, everything that 3 years never managed to say clearly. She only knew the cold, the fields, the particular exhaustion of loving something in silence for so long that the silence itself begins to feel like the only thing left. What she did not know was this: he did not leave. Chapter 2. What the Garden Keeps. Caius did not sleep. He lay in the dark with his eyes open, and the fire dying in the grate and the silence of Merrick Hall pressing down on the room the way it always did after midnight. Complete, indifferent, offering nothing. He thought about the garden. He thought about the sound. He stood there long enough that the cold settled into his coat, and the house behind him went fully quiet, and still he did not move, did not speak, did not announce himself. He simply stood in the dark and listened to Verity Marin cry as quietly as a person can cry when they have spent years learning that no one should hear. At some point she stopped, straightened, pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders with the efficient, deliberate movement of someone concluding a task. Then she walked back toward the house without turning around. He stepped back into the shadow of the doorway as she passed. She did not see him. He was not certain afterward whether that was fortunate or not. By 6 in the morning he was at his desk. The study was cold, the fire not yet lit, the window showing a sky the particular shade of grey that October reserved for its most determined mornings. He sat with his coffee and looked at nothing and thought about nothing, and did an extremely thorough job of both. The fire appeared at 6:30. Agnes, with her usual brisk efficiency, was in and out in under 2 minutes without making eye contact, which was standard practice and had nothing to do with anything. The window opened at 7:15. He heard it. The familiar sound of the latch, the slight resistance of old wood, the rush of cold air that followed. He did not look up. Verity moved through the room the way she always moved, quietly, directly, without unnecessary anything. She set the morning correspondence on the corner of the desk. She adjusted the lamp. She was halfway to the door before he spoke. "Miss Marin." She stopped, turned. Her expression was arranged perfectly, attentive, professional, faintly expectant. "Your Grace." He looked at her. She looked at him. The fire crackled once in the grate. "The correspondence from Hargrove and Sons," he said. "I'll need a response drafted by Thursday." A half-second pause, almost nothing. "Of course," she said. "I'll have it ready Wednesday evening. Thursday is sufficient." "Wednesday is better," she said, and left. He looked at the door after she closed it. Then he looked at his coffee. Then he picked up a letter from the correspondence pile and read the same opening sentence 4 times before putting it down. The thing about Merrick Hall was that it was not a large house by ducal standards, which meant that avoiding someone required actual strategy. Verity knew every corridor, every shortcut, every room that connected to which other room through which door. She also knew his schedule with the precision of someone who built her days around it for 3 years without ever admitting that was what she was doing. So avoiding him was, technically, possible. She avoided him with great technical skill for the entire morning. The study, she sent Agnes with the correspondence. The library, she went at 11, confirmed he was in the East Parlour reviewing the estate accounts, completed her business in 6 minutes, and left before the clock finished striking the quarter hour. The dining room at lunch, she took her meal in her office, which she sometimes did on busy days, and today was a busy day, and she did not examine that fact further. By 2 in the afternoon, she was in the still room going over the household supply inventory with Mrs. Hale, which was not a task that required her direct attention, but was the kind of task that kept her hands occupied and her mind in a manageable radius. Mrs. Hale knew this. Mrs. Hale knew most things. She had the institutional knowledge of a woman who observed 30 years of human behavior in a contained space and drew her conclusions quietly and kept them to herself, mostly. "The Prine family will send a representative next week," she said without looking up from the supply ledger, "to discuss arrangements. I'll prepare the guest rooms in the East Wing. Lady Cecilia may wish to inspect the house herself before the wedding. Then I'll prepare the East Wing thoroughly." Mrs. Hale made a note in the ledger. "You'll want to order the good linens from the supplier in Bath. The ones we have are fine for ordinary guests. Lady Cecilia is not an ordinary guest." "No?" said Mrs. Hale in a tone that contained a complete sentence she did not say aloud. Verity wrote Bath linens in her own ledger and did not respond to the tone. She saw him at 4. Not by design. The back staircase, which she used because it was faster, which it was and not for any other reason. He was coming up as she was going down, and the staircase was wide enough for 2 people to pass without difficulty, and narrow enough that passing required awareness of the other person's exact location. They both stopped on the landing. He was in his riding coat, which meant he came in from the grounds, his hair slightly disordered from the wind. There was a small leaf caught on his left shoulder that he was entirely unaware of. She was aware of it. She did not mention it. "Miss Maron." "Your Grace." She moved to the right to let him pass. "I'll have the draft correspondence on your desk by Wednesday." "I said Thursday." "Wednesday is better," she said again, and continued down the stairs. She heard him pause on the landing above her. She did not look back. That evening, after the household settled into its nighttime quiet, Verity sat in her office with a cup of tea that went cold without being touched. She was not looking at the supply ledger. She was looking at a blank page. She had been looking at it for 20 minutes. The house made its usual sounds, the wind through the elm, the distant settling of old stone, the particular creak of the 3rd step on the back staircase that she kept meaning to have fixed and somehow never did. Familiar sounds. The sounds of a place that had become, without her full permission, something that felt like home. She picked up her pen. At the top of the page, in the small, careful handwriting she used for things that mattered, she wrote 2 words. Resignation letter. Then she put the pen down. Not because she changed her mind, because some things once written deserve a moment before they become real. Outside, a door closed. His study from the sound of it. His footsteps in the corridor above. The pattern she knew so well she could have traced it in her sleep. They stopped, directly above her office. She looked at the ceiling. The footsteps did not continue. For a long moment, long enough that it could not be accidental, there was only silence. Then they moved on. Verity looked back at the page, at the 2 words she wrote. She did not add anything else that night. But she did not put the page away, either. Chapter 3. The Correct Thing. Lady Cecilia Prine arrived on a Tuesday. Verity knew this 3 days in advance, because the correspondence said Tuesday, and because she spent those 3 days preparing the East Wing with the kind of focused attention she applied to things she did not want to think about. Fresh linens from Bath. The good candelabras polished and placed, flowers from the greenhouse, late-season roses still holding, if barely. Mrs. Hale inspected the rooms on Monday evening, walked the length of the corridor twice and said nothing, which from Mrs. Hale meant the rooms were acceptable. Verity took it as high praise and went to bed at 11, which was earlier than usual, and lay there looking at the ceiling until well past midnight. The carriage arrived at 2:30 on Tuesday afternoon. Verity stood in the entrance hall with Mrs. Hale and 2 footmen, and the particular expression she kept for occasions that required her to be present without being noticed. Caius stood at the front, dressed correctly, posture correct, expression correct, everything, as always, correct. The door opened and Lady Cecilia Prine stepped into Merrick Hall. She was not what Verity expected, which was a fault in Verity's imagination, rather than anything Lady Cecilia did wrong. She expected someone decorative, someone assembled for the occasion. Lady Cecilia was assembled, certainly. The travelling dress was impeccable. The posture was the product of years and probably a governess with strong opinions about spinal alignment. But her eyes moved when she entered the room, quickly, intelligently, taking inventory without appearing to. She greeted Caius with a composed warmth that managed to be neither distant nor excessive, which was a more difficult thing to achieve than most people understood. "Your Grace," she said. "Lady Cecilia." He offered his arm. "Welcome to Merrick Hall." She took it. They walked into the house together. From the back of the hall, Verity watched them and noted, with the professional detachment she was very committed to maintaining, that they looked like exactly what they were. 2 people fulfilling an arrangement with good manners and no particular joy. Then, Lady Cecilia's eyes moved briefly across the hall, found Verity, and stopped for just a moment. Not rudely, not dismissively, just noting. Verity met the look with a steady nod. Lady Cecilia moved on. The first dinner was a quiet affair. Caius at the head of the table, Lady Cecilia to his right, the conversation civil, and measured in the way that conversations are civil and measured, when 2 people are still deciding what they are allowed to say to each other. Verity was not at dinner. She was in the kitchen, reviewing the menu for the following week with Cook, which was a task that could have waited until Wednesday, but did not wait because Wednesday felt far away, and the kitchen was warm and smelled of roasting meat, and no one in the kitchen was having dinner with Caius Holt. Cook, who had opinions about everything and shared them freely, offered 3 unsolicited thoughts on the subject of arranged marriages, 2 observations about Lady Cecilia's travelling dress, and 1 surprisingly astute remark about the nature of duty that Verity chose not to respond to. "The lamb for Thursday," Verity said, "from the village supplier or the estate?" Cook accepted the redirection with the good grace of someone who knew when a conversation was over. She encountered Lady Cecilia the next morning in the library. Verity came in at 9 to return an atlas, the one she borrowed 3 days prior and kept meaning to bring back, and found Lady Cecilia standing at the window with a book open in her hands and the early light falling across the pages in a way that would have been very pretty if Verity were in any condition to find things pretty. She was not. "Miss Marin," said Lady Cecilia, without turning from the window. She said it the way people say names when they already know them, not reading from a list, but retrieving something already filed. "Lady Cecilia." Verity moved to the shelf. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'll only be a moment." "You're not intruding." She turned then. Her expression was open in a way that was slightly unexpected, not performing warmth, simply offering it. "I was told this library was remarkable. I can confirm the report is accurate. His Grace has added to it considerably over the years." "So I see." Her eyes moved briefly to the atlas in Verity's hand, then back up. "Are you fond of maps?" A pause, small, but present. "I find them useful," Verity said. Something in Lady Cecilia's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one. "Of course," she said, and looked back at her book. Verity shelved the atlas, left. In the corridor, she stood for a moment with her hand still on the doorframe. Then she walked on. By the end of the first week, a pattern established itself. Caius managed the estate. Lady Cecilia moved through the house with the quiet self-possession of someone who understood that she was a guest in a place that would eventually be required to become her home. and was in no particular hurry to force the transition. They took meals together. They walked the grounds once on Thursday when the weather briefly permitted. Verity saw them from the upstairs corridor window, two figures moving along the garden path at a polite distance, their breath visible in the cold air, conversation appearing and disappearing in intervals that suggested effort rather than ease. She did not watch for long. She had things to do. She always had things to do. But she stood at that window for a moment longer than things to do required, and the cold glass was very cold under her fingertips, and the two figures in the garden below looked so thoroughly, so precisely, so completely wrong for each other that it almost felt like something she imagined. Almost. On Friday evening, she finished the East Wing inventory, updated the household accounts, drafted 2 letters on Caius's behalf for correspondence that required responses, and sat for a long time at her desk doing nothing. The blank page was still there. The 2 words at the top, resignation letter. She pulled it toward her, picked up her pen, held it over the page for long enough that the fire in the small grate burned down a full inch. Then she heard footsteps in the corridor. Not his. She knew his. These were lighter, more deliberate. They stopped outside her door and there was a pause, and then a knock. 2 knocks, precise and unhurried. She put the pen down. "Come in." Lady Cecilia opened the door. She stood in the frame for a moment, dressed for the evening, a small oil lamp in her hand that she clearly brought herself because she did not know which corridors were lit at this hour, which meant she came looking. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, and did not look sorry in the least, not rudely but in the way of someone who decided to do something and did it without excessive apology. "I wanted to ask about the morning arrangements. His Grace mentioned you manage the household schedule." "I do." Verity gestured to the chair across the desk. "Please sit." Lady Cecilia sat, set the lamp on the corner of the desk, looked around the small office with those quick, intelligent eyes. They landed briefly on the blank page with the 2 words at the top. Verity turned it over without hurrying, without making it a moment. Lady Cecilia looked back at her and said nothing about it. They talked about morning arrangements for 12 minutes. Lady Cecilia was precise, considerate, and asked 2 questions that revealed she paid considerably more attention to how a household functioned than most women of her position were expected to. At the end, she stood to leave, then paused. "Miss Marin," she said, not quite a question. "Lady Cecilia." She looked at her for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read, not unkind, not calculating, but the look of someone who arrived at a thought and was deciding whether to say it. She decided against it. "Good evening," she said instead. "Good evening," said Verity. The door closed. Verity sat in the silence of her office for a long time after. Then she picked up the page, turned it back over, looked at the 2 words, and for the first time picked up her pen and began to write below them. Chapter 4. What he does with silence. The letter arrived on his desk on a Monday morning. Not the Hargrove correspondence, not the estate accounts, not the quarterly review from the solicitor in London that he was expecting, and had been, if he was honest, quietly dreading. A single page folded once, his name written on the front in the small, careful handwriting he recognized without needing to read it. He opened it. Read it. The language was precise, professional, grateful in the way that formal letters are grateful, correctly without excess, 2 weeks' notice, or longer if required, a full transition document to be prepared, every account, every supplier contact, every staff schedule through spring, everything in order, everything accounted for. He set it on the corner of the desk and went back to the Hargrove correspondence. Verity waited 2 days for a response. She was not technically waiting. She was working. The household did not pause because she sent a letter, and Lady Cecilia's presence added a reasonable layer of additional coordination that kept her occupied from early morning until well into the evening. Menus, schedules, the bath linens that arrived with one set incorrectly hemmed and needed to be returned, a disagreement between Thomas and Agnes about the placement of the greenhouse flowers in the entrance hall that required the diplomatic patience of someone substantially more experienced in armed conflict than Verity was. She handled all of it. She always handled all of it, but she noticed, with the peripheral awareness she applied to everything in this house, that there was no response on her desk. No note slipped under the office door. No word sent through Mrs. Hale, who served as the unofficial diplomatic channel for anything Caius preferred not to address directly. Nothing. On Wednesday, she sent Agnes to confirm Thursday's correspondence was on the desk. It was, right where she left it, her letter still on the corner, unmoved. She thanked Agnes, went back to the hemmed linens, did not think about the letter, did not think about it considerably, and at length for the rest of the day. The evening was worse. The house settled into its nighttime quiet, and she sat in her office with the supply ledger open in front of her, and the lamp burning low, and the particular stillness that comes when a person has run out of tasks and is left alone with whatever they were using the tasks to avoid. She closed the ledger. Opened it again. Closed it. Outside, the elm moved in the wind, and somewhere above her the study floorboards carried the familiar weight of his footsteps, back and forth, which meant he was thinking about something. He only paced when something required more than his desk could solve. She told herself it had nothing to do with her letter. She was almost convincing. The confrontation, when it came, was not in the corridor. It was in the library. Thursday evening after dinner, when the house settled and she went to return the atlas she borrowed, the new one from the London package, the one covering the northern coast, and she pushed open the library door, and Caius was there, standing at the shelves, a book in one hand, not reading it, holding it with the particular stillness of someone who went somewhere to think and chose a room with books, because it was easier than choosing a room without them. The fire was lower than it should have been, which meant he dismissed whoever came to tend it. The room smelled of old paper and candle wax, and the faint trace of cold air from the window he left open a crack, the way he sometimes did when the study felt too close. He looked up when she entered. She nearly took a step back, did not. "Your Grace." She moved toward the shelf. "I'll only be a moment." "Miss Marin." Something in the way he said it. Not a greeting, not a dismissal, a door opening that she was not prepared for. She stopped. He closed the book, set it on the shelf without looking at where it landed, which was unlike him. He was precise about the library, always. Everything returned to exactly where it belonged. "You submitted a resignation," he said. "I did." "Without discussion," he said. "A resignation letter is, by nature, a discussion," she said, "conducted in writing." He looked at her with the expression she privately thought of as his full attention, the one where everything else in the room ceased to matter, and you became the only problem he was currently solving. It was deeply uncomfortable. She spent 3 years developing a tolerance for it that she would generously describe as partial. "Why?" he said. One word, not even inflected as a question, simply placed in the room between them and left there. "I believe the household will benefit from a fresh perspective," she said. "Particularly given the change in circumstances. A new household manager, someone Lady Cecilia selects herself, would ensure continuity through the wedding and beyond, and—" "That is not why," he said. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the elm. The clock on the mantel measured the silence in small, indifferent increments. "It is a professional assessment," she said carefully, "made with the household's best interest in verity." The sound of her name, her actual name, not Miss Marin, not the title she wore like a uniform for 3 years, landed somewhere in her chest and did something she was entirely unprepared for. She did not move. He did not move either. The firelight was unsteady. It moved across the shelves, across the spines of books, across the lines of his face, with the particular honesty that candlelight and firelight have, illuminating exactly what a person would prefer to keep in shadow. "Why?" he said again, and this time it was quieter, which made it worse. She looked at him across the length of the library, and for one moment, one single unguarded moment, she was simply tired. Tired of careful, tired of composed, tired of 3 years of knowing exactly where she was allowed to stand and standing precisely there and not 1 inch further. "Because I cannot stay," she said. Not the professional answer. Not any answer she planned to give. His jaw tightened. Something moved through his expression that she did not have time to read before he controlled it. "That is not a reason. It is the only one I have." The silence that followed was different from the other silences in 3 years of silences. Heavier, the kind that sits in a room and changes the temperature of the air. She put the atlas on the shelf. Her hand was steady. She was very proud of that. "I'll have a full transition document prepared within the month," she said. "Every account, every supplier, every staff schedule through spring. Whoever comes after me will have everything they need." She walked to the door. "The letter stands," she said, before he could speak. "I'm sorry." She did not wait for his response. She left. He stood in the library for a long time after the door closed. The fire burned down. The wind outside continued its conversation with the elm. Somewhere in the house a clock struck 9, then the quarter hour, then the half, and he did not move from where he stood, because moving felt like something he needed to decide to do, and he had not yet decided. Because I cannot stay. Not because it is time. Not because it is professionally appropriate. Not because the arrangement has reached its natural conclusion. Because I cannot. He knew what cannot meant. He used the word himself privately on more than one occasion, in reference to things he refused to examine directly. He understood it as a door you close, not because there is nothing behind it, but precisely because there is. He walked to the shelf where she put the atlas, looked at it. The northern coast. He ordered it in February, after he noticed the gap in the collection, the region she had not yet reached on the shelf. He ordered it without deliberating about whether he should, the way he did not deliberate about the first 4 atlases or the ones before those. It was simply a thing that needed doing, and he did it. He pulled it from the shelf now, opened it to the first page. In the bottom corner, very faint, barely there, the trace of a pencil line. The outline of a coast traced and then half erased, as if someone thought better of leaving a mark, and then did not quite manage to remove it completely. He stood with the atlas in his hands for a long moment, then he set it carefully back on the shelf, precisely where it belonged, and went to find Cecilia. Chapter 5. What Cecilia Sees. He found her in the east parlor. She sat by the window with a letter in her lap, her own correspondence from the look of it, the handwriting on the outside familiar enough that she folded it away without rushing when he knocked, not hiding it, simply finishing with it before turning her attention to the next thing. "Your Grace." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please." He sat. The east parlor was the warmest room in the house at this hour. Southern exposure, and the fire Mrs. Hale kept at a precise temperature that suggested she had opinions about what comfort meant and intended to enforce them. A tea tray sat on the low table between them, untouched. Outside the window, the last of the afternoon light moved across the garden in long, flat angles, the way autumn light does when it has given up pretending to be summer and is simply doing its job until winter arrives to relieve it. "I wanted to speak with you," he said. "About the arrangements." "Of course." Her hands rested in her lap, composed. "I've been meaning to raise the question of timing myself. The spring date, my mother has concerns about the church availability in the village. If it would suit, we might consider." "That is not what I meant," he said. She stopped, looked at him, looked. He looked back at her, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the fire made its small sounds, and the clock on the mantel measured the silence, and outside the last of the light continued its indifferent work across the garden. "No," she said after a moment, quietly. "I suppose it isn't." She was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable, thinking. The way she thought, he noticed, was visible only in the slight stillness that came over her before she spoke, as if she gathered everything first, and then released it in order. "Can I tell you something I observed," she said, "about your household?" He was not expecting that. "Yes." She looked at the window. "I went to the library 3 days ago, early. I didn't sleep well, and I wanted a book. Miss Marin was there." A pause. "She had an atlas, one of the large ones from the northern shelf. She was returning it, I think, but she stopped for a moment before she put it back." Another pause, shorter. She opened it to a page near the middle and looked at it the way people look at things they love and have decided they are not allowed to love. Then she shelved it, very carefully, like it mattered. He said nothing. "I asked if she was fond of maps," Cecilia continued. "She said she found them useful." The corner of her mouth moved, which was the most unconvincing thing I heard anyone say in recent memory. You could see half a coastline traced on her face when she said it. The fire shifted in the grate. A log settled. "She's been with the house 3 years," Cecilia said. It was not quite a question. "Yes. And the library. It's grown considerably from what I can tell. The collection is remarkable. Recent acquisitions, by the look of some of them." He did not answer. She turned from the window then and looked at him directly, with those quick, intelligent eyes that he understood now missed considerably less than they appeared to. "The atlases," she said. "The geographical section. Did you order those?" The clock on the mantel struck the half-hour. "Some of them," he said. Cecilia looked at him for a long moment. And in that moment, in the space between her question and whatever she was about to say next, something shifted in the room. Not dramatically. Not with any of the machinery of scenes designed to shift. Simply the quiet, irrevocable movement of two people arriving simultaneously at the same understanding. She saw it on his face. He knew she did, because she was the kind of woman who saw things and did not pretend otherwise. "I see," she said, 2 words, carrying the full weight of everything she chose not to say around them. He looked at the window. At the garden, where the last of the light was nearly gone now, the elm at the far end reduced to a shape against the darkening sky. "Lady Cecilia, please don't apologize," she said, not sharply, with a firmness that was almost kind. "I find apologies for things people cannot help rather exhausting." He closed his mouth. She looked down at her hands in her lap. For the first time since she arrived at Merrick Hall, she looked like someone carrying something that cost her, not broken by it, not defeated, but aware of the weight in a way she had not allowed to show before. "My mother will be difficult," she said after a moment. "I am aware. My father less so. He is a practical man." A pause. More practical than this arrangement deserved, perhaps. "I should have been clearer," he said. "Before the announcement, I should have—" "We both agreed," she said simply, "for what seemed like reasonable reasons at the time." She looked up. "I don't think either of us were wrong exactly. I think we were both looking for the correct thing to do and mistook it for the right thing." He had nothing to say to that, mostly because it was more accurate than anything he managed to articulate to himself in the past several days. "There is someone," she said. Not a question. He was quiet for a moment. "There is," he said. She nodded once, the small nod of someone filing information they already suspected and are now confirming. "Does she know? She submitted her resignation this week." Something crossed Cecilia's expression, surprise and then something adjacent to laughter that she controlled before it arrived. "Of course she did," she said quietly, to no one in particular. They sat for a moment in what was, surprisingly, not an uncomfortable silence. The fire, the clock, the darkening garden. "I think," said Cecilia, with the measured precision of someone choosing each word the way you choose footing on uncertain ground, "that we both know this isn't right." He looked at her. "I think we do," he said. She picked up the teapot, poured 2 cups with the steady hands of a woman who decided something and felt, now that it was decided, considerably lighter. "Then we are in agreement," she said. She held out one of the cups. "Tea, Your Grace, and then I think we have some letters to write." He took the cup. Outside, the elm was a dark shape against a darker sky, and the garden held the particular stillness of a place waiting for something to happen. He drank the tea and thought about a woman with an atlas in her hands and half a coastline traced on her face. And then he stood. "Forgive me," he said. Cecilia looked up, raised an eyebrow. "You haven't finished your tea." "No," he said, "I haven't." He set the cup down on the tray and walked to the door. "Your Grace," she said behind him. He stopped. "The atlas," she said. "The northern coast. You should tell her about it, that you ordered it." A pause. "I think she doesn't know." He stood in the doorway for a moment. "No," he said. "She doesn't." He stood in the doorway one moment longer, long enough to feel the full weight of everything he almost let go, and then walked out into the corridor toward the garden. Chapter 6. The garden again. She ordered the carriage for 7 in the morning. Mrs. Hale received the request without expression, which was its own kind of expression. She wrote it in the household log with the same pen she used for coal deliveries and linen orders and every other thing that came and went through Merrick Hall, and she did not say a single word. which was the loudest thing Verity heard all day. The bags were by the door of her room. 2 of them, the same 2 she arrived with 3 years ago, though heavier now in the way that time makes things heavier even when you are not paying attention. The transition document sat on her desk, complete. 41 pages, every account annotated, every supplier noted, every staff preference and peculiarity recorded with the thoroughness of someone who understood that leaving well was the last professional courtesy she could offer. She looked around the office one final time. The lamp, the ledger shelf, the small table where she spread the maps on late nights when the house was quiet and she went somewhere else for an hour without moving from her chair. The window that looked out over the kitchen garden, unremarkable, practical, exactly the kind of view that a housekeeper's office window should have. She turned the lamp down and went outside, not to leave. The carriage was not until morning. She went because the house felt, in that particular evening, too much like a place she was already gone from, and the garden at least was still real. The cold, the elm, the iron bench no one ever used, the low wall at the far end, where the grounds gave way to fields and the sky went on without interruption. She walked the familiar path without thinking about it. Past the greenhouse, past the dormant rose beds that Thomas would cut back next week, past the place where the gravel gave way to grass and her footsteps went quiet. October had sharpened overnight, the kind of cold that clarifies everything, the outlines of things, the distances between them, the particular silence that falls over an English garden in the last weeks of autumn, when it has finished with the year and is simply waiting. She reached the low wall, stood there. 3 years ago she stood in this same place and cried as quietly as she could and thought no one heard. She understood now, with the hindsight that came too late and too clearly, that someone did. She was not crying tonight. She was something past crying, the particular stillness on the other side of it, where everything is very quiet and very certain, and there is nothing left to decide. She heard the garden door. She did not turn around. Footsteps on the gravel. Not Agnes, not Thomas, not Mrs. Hale. She knew the weight of this particular footfall, the way you know the sound of a door in your own house in the dark. Without thinking, without trying. The footsteps stopped. She waited for him to speak. He did not speak. The silence stretched between them, and the cold pressed in from the fields, and somewhere in the distance an owl made its single inquiring sound and received no answer. Then, to her left, movement. She turned. He was not walking toward her. He walked along the side of the house to the ground floor window of the study, the window that looked out over the east side of the garden, visible from where she stood, visible from the wall, from the bench, from any point along this particular path. He reached the window, he opened it, just that. The familiar motion, the latch, the slight resistance of old wood, the window swinging outward into the cold night air. He stepped back and looked at her. Verity stood very still, the open window. The study dark behind it, no fire lit, no lamp, just the window open to the night air, the way it was open every morning for 3 years because she opened it, because she noticed in the first weeks that he always opened it himself when he arrived, and so she began arriving earlier, and she opened it, and he never had to. He never asked. She never explained. It simply became the way mornings worked at Merrick Hall, and she stopped noticing she was doing it the way you stopped noticing breathing, because it was that fundamental and that ordinary and that completely, devastatingly not ordinary at all. He knew. That was what the open window said in the cold and the dark, with no words around it. He knew. He always knew. He noticed every morning the way she noticed every morning, and he said nothing, and she said nothing, and 3 years went by in that particular silence, and now he was standing in the garden in the dark, opening a window that did not need to be open so that she would understand what he could not find another way to say. Her throat tightened. She looked at the window. At him. At the window again. "You ordered the atlases," she said. Not a question. "Yes," he said. "All of them." "Most of them." The owl called again somewhere in the dark fields. Still no answer. "You never said anything," she said. "No." 3 years. "Yes." She looked at him across the garden, this man who expressed himself in open windows and atlases ordered from London, and coffee left exactly where it was every morning, and an umbrella by the door that she replaced twice and then stopped replacing, and he never mentioned either time. "I was going to leave," she said. "I know. The carriage is ordered for 7. I know that too." She pressed her lips together. Something moved through her chest that she did not have a name for, or had a name for, and had been refusing to use for approximately 3 years. "Caius," she said. "His name. Just his name, without the title, without the Your Grace, without any of the architecture she built around him for 3 years to keep a professional distance that apparently fooled neither of them." He crossed the garden. Not quickly, not with any of the urgency that the situation perhaps warranted, with the same deliberate steadiness he brought to everything, as if he decided to do this and intended to do it correctly and was not going to rush it now, simply because it was 3 years overdue. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see his breath in the cold air, close enough that she was aware, acutely, of the precise distance between them. Not large at all. "I am not good at this," he said, low, direct, with the particular honesty of someone who gave up managing his expression about 30 seconds ago. "I want you to know that I am aware of that." "I know," she said. "I have been aware of it for some time." "I know that too." Something shifted in his face. Not quite the expression she saw in the library, something beyond it. Something that 3 years of control and silence and open windows and atlases from London had been building toward and had finally, irrevocably, arrived. "Don't go," he said. 2 words. The elm moved in the wind above them. The open window of the study caught the cold air and let it in. The fields beyond the wall went on and on in the dark. All those coastlines on all those maps, all those places she traced with one finger on late nights when the house was quiet. She looked at him. She did not step back. And that changed everything. Chapter 7. Verity. They went inside. Not immediately. They stood in the garden for a moment longer, the cold, the open window above them, the elm making its steady sound in the wind. And then Caius turned toward the house, and she walked beside him. Not behind him the way she walked for 3 years, and neither of them commented on that. Mrs. Hale was in the kitchen corridor when they came through the door. She looked at Verity. She looked at Caius. She looked at the open garden door behind them with the particular expression of a woman completing a very long calculation that had finally resolved itself. "I'll put the kettle on," she said, and went back to the kitchen. Caius looked at the kitchen door for a moment after she disappeared through it. "She knew," he said. "Mrs. Hale knows everything," said Verity. "She has known everything for 30 years. She simply waits for everyone else to catch up." Something crossed his face, not quite a smile, the architecture of one, briefly visible before he contained it. He was getting slower at containing things, she noticed that. They went to the study, not by plan. It was simply the room they walked toward, the way water finds the lowest point without deliberating about it. He lit the lamp. She went to the window, still open from the garden, and stood beside it for a moment, feeling the cold air come in before she closed it. She latched it carefully. He watched her do it. The fire was low. Agnes had not yet been in for the evening, and the room was cooler than usual, the lamp throwing its small circle of warmth against the shelves, the desk, the chair where she sat once a week to go over the household accounts, while he worked on correspondence and the fire crackled, and neither of them spoke unless one of them had something that needed saying. 3 years of Thursday evenings, all of them in this room. She turned from the window. He was standing by the desk, not sitting, standing with his hands at his sides in the posture of a man who decided something and was about to act on it and was not going to let the weight of the moment make him retreat. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me several." "Yes." A pause. "I know." She waited. "The garden," he said. "That night. I heard you." The lamp flame moved in a draught from somewhere. The room was very quiet. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You knew." "I suspected. After." She folded her hands in front of her, then, aware of what she was doing, let them fall to her sides. "You were different the next morning. You are not generally different." "No," he said, "I'm not." It is one of the more reliable things about you." He absorbed that for a moment. I stood there for some time. I gathered. I should have said something. "Yes," she said simply. "You should have." He looked at her with the full attention expression, and she met it the way she always met it, steadily, without flinching, except that now there was nothing professional underneath the steadiness. Just her. Just this. "I am not going to make a speech," he said. "I didn't expect one. I don't have a ring." A pause, shorter than the others. "I went to the garden without preparing anything. I want you to know that I am aware that is not the correct way to do this." She looked at him. "Caius," she said. "I am also aware," he continued, with the focused determination of a man who decided to say a thing and intended to finish it regardless of interruption, "that I have spent 3 years demonstrating a comprehensive inability to say what I mean at any point when it would have been useful to say it, and that this is not a quality you should have to excuse. I'm not excusing it." "Good," he exhaled. "Good." The fire shifted. A log settled in the grate and sent a brief warmth through the room. "Stay," he said, "not as my housekeeper." 3 words, no ceremony around them, no architecture of declaration or persuasion, just the plain truth of what he wanted, offered without performance by a man who spent a lifetime saying exactly as much as was necessary and nothing beyond it. She looked at him across the study, the desk between them, the lamp, the shelves full of books and atlases, the window she opened every morning for 3 years and would apparently keep opening for considerably longer. "Verity," he said. Just that. Her name without anything attached to it, no title, no Miss Marin, none of the careful distance she wore and he maintained, and both of them pretended, was simply professional courtesy. Just 2 syllables, said the way you say something that belongs to you. The fire crackled. She did not answer immediately. She made him wait, not cruelly, not from strategy, but because 3 years of silence deserved one honest moment before she closed the distance between what was and what would be. Because some things, once said, deserve a breath before they become real. Then she crossed the room, not to the desk, to him. She stopped close enough that the lamplight reached them both, close enough that she could see the exact moment his expression did the thing it almost never did. Let go. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment, as if confirming the word was real and not something he assembled from wanting it to be. Then he reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with the careful orchestration of a man performing an emotion. Simply took it, the way you take hold of something you are not going to put down again. The study was warm now. The fire found its rhythm. Outside, the elm moved in the last of the evening wind, and Merrick Hall made its old familiar sounds. The stone, the corridors, the particular settling of a house that had been waiting, in its patient architectural way, for something to shift. Mrs. Hale appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea. She looked at their joined hands, at Verity, at Caius. "The carriage," she said, "for 7 in the morning." "Cancel it," said Caius. Mrs. Hale looked at him for exactly 1 second. "I already did," she said, set the tea on the desk, and left. Epilogue. Some months later, winter came to Merrick Hall the way it always came, quietly, completely, settling into the stone without asking permission. The study was warm. Verity sat at the desk with the atlas open in front of her, the northern coast, the one with the faint pencil line in the bottom corner that she never quite managed to erase, and a cup of tea that was, as usual, going cold without being touched. The lamp was lit. Outside the window, the first snow of the season came down in the particular unhurried way of snow that intends to stay. She heard him in the corridor. His footsteps, the pattern she knew so well she stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat, because it was that constant and that ordinary, and not ordinary at all. He came into the study. He did not ask what she was looking at. He came around the desk and stood beside her chair and looked at the open page, the coastline, the small, careful notations in the margins, the pencil line that was almost gone, but not quite. "Here," he said, and pointed to a place on the map. A bay on the northern coast, unremarkable on paper, the kind of place that exists in atlases and nowhere else for most people. She looked at it. "What's there?" "I have no idea," he said. I thought we could find out." She looked up at him. He was watching her with the expression that still, after several months, arrived before he could manage it. The one that had nothing professional underneath it and never would again. She looked back at the map, traced the coastline with one finger. The same gesture she made alone late at night for 3 years in this house, except that now he was beside her, and the lamp reached them both, and outside the snow came down over the garden, and the elm and the low wall at the far end where the grounds gave way to the fields. "All right," she said. He pulled the other chair around, sat beside her, not across beside, the way that still felt like something new even when it was becoming ordinary, the good kind of ordinary, the kind you build on purpose. Mrs. Hale appeared in the doorway with fresh tea, took one look at the two of them bent over the atlas, and set the tray down without a word. At the door she paused. "The east window," she said, to no one in particular. "It was open this morning before either of you were up. She left before anyone could respond." Verity looked at Caius. He looked at the map. "The kettle," he said, "needed time to boil." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the northern coast, at the bay with no name, at all that open water waiting to be visited by two people who finally, after a very long time, had somewhere to go together. Outside, the snow continued. The window stayed closed, and Merrick Hall was warm. And that's where we leave them, warm together and exactly where they were always meant to be. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. The next story, I promise, is going to be something special. See you soon.
She came with one bag and a letter to a house that held the cold like grief. He stood with his back to the doorway, a man who had forgotten to believe. She learned his silence like a language, the coffee cold, the fire burning high. She left him signs like candles in windows, not expecting anyone to reply. 3 years of almost, 3 years of near, two people speaking in what they couldn't hear. But love finds its way through the quietest doors in the wait of 3 years. And what silence is for. He noticed everything she never told him. He ordered gifts she'd never know he sent. She packed her bags the night he found her crying, and stood in the dark to understand what it meant. He opened a window in the garden. No words, just the things she'd always done. And she understood in the cold October that 3 years of silence had finally come undone. 3 years of almost, 3 years of near, two people speaking in what they couldn't hear. But love finds its way through the quietest doors in the wait of 3 years. And what what silence is for. Don't go, he said, just 2 words in the dark. She didn't step back, and that changed everything. Now the fire is warm and the snow falls outside. 2 people beside each other with nowhere left to hide. She stayed, he knew, and Merrick Hall was fine.